The blonde hair on his jacket. My name is Kimberly Vargas, and I discovered my husband was cheating when I found a long blonde hair on his navy blue suit jacket. Not just one hair. Not a one-time occurrence I could dismiss as coincidence or contamination from dry cleaning or public transportation. Multiple blonde hairs over several weeks, on different jackets and shirts, and even once on the collar of his winter coat. Long, straight, distinctly blonde hairs that couldn't possibly have come from me because my hair was dark brown, shoulder length, and wavy, the opposite of everything these blonde strands represented. The first hair I found in late October. I'd been hanging up Marcus's suit jacket after he'd tossed it over the dining room chair. A habit that drove me crazy. His inability to walk 10 extra feet to the bedroom closet. His assumption that someone else would eventually deal with his clothing. I'd picked up the jacket with that particular mixture of annoyance and resignation that comes from 13 years of marriage to someone whose domestic habits never quite match your own. And that's when I saw it. A single blonde hair, maybe 14 inches long, clinging to the dark fabric of his jacket shoulder. Visible because of the contrast. Pale gold against navy blue, impossible to miss once you noticed it. My first thought was innocent. We lived in Los Angeles. Marcus worked in commercial real estate development, spent his days in meetings with clients and contractors and architects and city planners. He rode elevators and sat in conference rooms and navigated crowded restaurants for business lunches. A stray hair could have transferred from anyone. A colleague standing too close in an elevator, a client who'd hugged him after closing a deal, a random woman who'd brushed past him in a coffee shop. I removed the hair, threw it away, forgot about it. The second hair appeared 2 weeks later, same jacket, different location. This time on the lapel, as if someone had leaned against him, had been close enough for extended contact, rather than brief passing proximity. I remembered the first hair. Felt a small flutter of something that wasn't quite suspicion yet, but wasn't quite comfort either. 2 hairs could still be coincidence. Could still be explained by the randomness of daily life in a city where you encountered hundreds of people in buildings and streets and professional spaces. But then I found a third hair. And a fourth. And by December, I was finding blonde hairs weekly. On his jackets, on his dress shirts, once tangled in the buttons of his coat. Always long, always blonde, always in places that suggested proximity, contact, intimacy of some kind. I started paying attention to other signs. Marcus had been different lately. Not dramatically different. He hadn't suddenly started working late every night or become defensive about his phone or shown the obvious red flags people in movies display when they're having affairs, but subtly changed in ways I couldn't quite articulate until I started actively looking for them. He'd been happier, more energized. He smiled more, hummed while getting ready for work, seemed excited about his days in ways he hadn't been in years. He'd started going to the gym regularly again after a long period of sporadic attendance, had lost weight, looked better, seemed more confident in his body and his clothes. He'd also been more attentive to me, brought home flowers occasionally, suggested date nights, initiated sex more frequently, all things that should have made me happy, that would have made me happy if I hadn't also been finding blonde hairs that suggested his renewed interest in our marriage might be powered by guilt about interest elsewhere. I tried to identify who in Marcus's professional life was blonde. His assistant Rosa had dark hair like mine. His boss Amanda was a redhead. His main business partner Kenneth was a man, obviously not the source of long blonde hairs. But Marcus worked with dozens of people daily. clients who hired his firm to develop commercial properties, contractors who built those properties, architects who designed them, city officials who permitted them, any number of professional women he encountered regularly who could be blonde, could be standing close enough to leave hairs on his clothing, could be the source of whatever was happening. I thought about confronting him directly, holding up one of those blonde hairs and saying, "Where is this coming from? Who are you spending time with?" But confrontation based on circumstantial evidence felt premature. Hairs weren't proof of anything except proximity. And if I was wrong, if there was an innocent explanation, accusing Marcus based on hair evidence would damage trust in ways that might be irreparable. So instead, I started monitoring more carefully, checking his clothing every time he came home from work, noting patterns, which days produced blonde hairs, which didn't, trying to correlate hair evidence with his calendar, with meetings and appointments and client visits that might explain the contact. The pattern I found was alarming. Blonde hairs appeared most frequently on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes Wednesdays, never Mondays or Fridays, which suggested whoever was leaving these hairs was someone Marcus saw on a regular schedule, not random encounters or coincidental meetings. I checked his calendar. He kept it synced to our shared Google Calendar, so I always knew roughly where he was and when. Tuesdays, he had standing afternoon meetings at a development site in Culver City. Thursdays, he had client meetings that varied, but were usually in downtown LA. Wednesdays were inconsistent, sometimes office days, sometimes site visits. None of this was new. Marcus had been going to these same meetings for months, but the blonde hairs were relatively recent, October through December. Maybe 3 months of accumulated evidence that something had changed even if his schedule hadn't. In mid-December, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Marcus's phone. He'd left it charging in the kitchen overnight, and I'd picked it up at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, when the accumulated anxiety of blonde hairs and unanswered questions had made lying in bed, pretending everything was normal, feel impossible. His passcode was our wedding anniversary, 0809, which either suggested innocence or complacency, depending on how you interpreted it. The phone unlocked easily. I checked his text messages first. Conversations with me, with his business partner Kenneth, with clients, with his sister, with various contractors and colleagues. Nothing suspicious, nothing hidden. No contact saved under a woman's name I didn't recognize. His call log showed the same pattern. Work calls, calls to me, calls to family and known friends. No repeated calls to unknown numbers that might indicate a relationship he was hiding. His email was similarly innocent. Work correspondence, newsletters, automated confirmations from restaurants and services he'd used. Nothing suggesting an affair. Either Marcus was having an affair and was remarkably careful about hiding digital evidence, or he wasn't having an affair, and I was constructing an elaborate narrative based on hair. But the hairs were real. Physical evidence that couldn't be explained away as imagination or paranoia. Someone blonde was making regular physical contact with my husband. Close enough contact to leave hair on his clothing. Repeated enough contact that it happened weekly. The Saturday before Christmas, Marcus mentioned he had a site visit scheduled for Tuesday morning. New residential development in Culver City, he said over breakfast. 6-story mixed-use building. Should be interesting. First project of this scale we've done in that neighborhood. How long will you be there? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Most of the day, probably. Site walk in the morning, then meetings with the architect and contractors in the afternoon. I'll text you when I'm heading home. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to my job at the university, where I worked as an academic advisor. Told my supervisor I had a migraine, needed to take the day to recover in a dark room. Then I drove to Culver City. I found the development site easily. Marcus had mentioned the address in passing, and I'd memorized it with the attention of someone gathering intelligence rather than making casual conversation. The building was mid-construction, steel framework visible, workers in hard hats moving around the site. I parked down the street and waited. Felt absurd doing it, like a suspicious wife from a thriller novel, stalking her husband based on blonde hair evidence that could mean nothing. But I'd come this far. I needed to see what Tuesday meetings looked like. At 10:47 a.m., Marcus arrived, parked his car, grabbed his hard hat from the trunk, walked onto the site. He was joined almost immediately by a woman. She was blonde, very blonde, hair that fell past her shoulders in straight golden sheets that caught sunlight even on an overcast December morning. She wore jeans, work boots, a fleece jacket, carried architectural plans rolled under one arm. She smiled when she saw Marcus, and he smiled back in a way that made something twist in my chest. They walked the site together, stopped frequently to look at plans, point at different parts of the building, have conversations I couldn't hear from my surveillance position down the street. But I could see body language, could see how close they stood, how he'd touch her arm when making a point, how she'd lean toward him when listening. The kind of unconscious physical intimacy that develops between people who spend significant time together, who've become comfortable in each other's space. After 90 minutes of sight walking, they went into a construction trailer for what I assumed were the afternoon meetings Marcus had mentioned. I waited, watched workers come and go, tried to decide if what I'd witnessed was professional or personal or some complicated combination that existed in the gray area between. At 2:34 p.m., Marcus and the blonde woman emerged from the trailer. They walked to the parking area together, stood by her car talking for another 10 minutes. Then, and this is the moment that made my decision for me, she hugged him goodbye. Not a professional handshake or a brief platonic hug. A real embrace. Her arms around his neck, his arms around her waist, lasting long enough that anyone watching would know these weren't just colleagues. When they separated, Marcus's jacket had several long blonde hairs visible on the shoulder. The same hairs I'd been finding for months. Mystery solved. I drove home feeling hollow. Made dinner I didn't want to eat. Helped our 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, with her homework, while feeling like I was performing the role of mother rather than being one. Pretended everything was normal when Marcus came home, smelling like construction site and betrayal. How was the site visit? I asked over dinner. Good, productive. Building is coming along ahead of schedule. Who was there, besides you? The usual team, Kenneth, the architect, general contractor, some of the subcontractors. He didn't mention the blonde woman, didn't mention spending all day with her, walking the site with her, hugging her goodbye. Just the usual team, like she wasn't worth mentioning, like she was background personnel rather than someone leaving physical evidence on his clothing. The architect, I said, pushing slightly. What's their name? Blake? Blake Morrison. Why? Her. The architect was a her. Blake Morrison, who wore her blonde hair long and straight, and hugged my husband goodbye after spending entire days with him on construction sites. Just curious, I said. You don't usually talk much about the people you work with. That night after Sophie went to bed, I Googled Blake Morrison Architect, Los Angeles. Found her easily. She had a professional website showcasing her work, a LinkedIn profile, an Instagram account that was mostly photos of buildings, but occasionally included selfies that confirmed she was indeed very blonde, very attractive, very much the kind of woman who could make a husband forget he was married. Her LinkedIn showed she'd been working with Marcus's firm since August. 4 months. The timeline matched. Blonde hair started appearing in October, 2 months after they'd begun working together. Long enough to develop professional rapport. Long enough for professional to start bleeding into personal. I looked at her Instagram more carefully. Recent posts showed the Culver City development, steel framework, construction progress photos, architectural details. And in one photo from 3 weeks ago, a group shot of the project team. Blake in the center, Marcus visible on the right side, both smiling, casual, comfortable. The caption read, "Amazing team making this vision reality. Grateful for collaborators who push me to do my best work. Just architecture under development, on teamwork, Grinchin, Culver City." Marcus had liked the photo, had commented, "Great work, Blake. This building is going to be something special. Public interaction, professional interaction, nothing inappropriate on the surface." But combined with the hairs, the Tuesday patterns, the hug I'd witnessed, the pieces assembled into something that looked increasingly like an affair. I confronted him that night. After Sophie was asleep, after we'd finished the mindless evening routine of dishes and TV and pretending everything was normal, "I need to ask you about Blake Morrison," I said. His face did something subtle. Not quite guilt, but not quite innocence either. Careful consideration of how to respond. "What about her? Are you having an affair?" "What? No. Why would you ask that?" "Because I've been finding blonde hairs on your clothing for 3 months. Long blonde hairs, every Tuesday and Thursday. From someone who's obviously standing very close to you. And today I followed you to the Culver City site and watched you spend all day with a blonde woman who hugged you goodbye in a way that was definitely not professional. You followed me. I followed you because you've been lying. Not by what you say, but by what you don't say. You've been spending days with Blake Morrison, and you've never mentioned her name. Never said, 'I'm working with this architect, Blake.' Just vague references to the team, like she's not worth mentioning specifically, which suggests mentioning her would require explanations you don't want to give." He sat down heavily. "I'm not having an affair. Blake and I work together. That's it. We're not sleeping together. We haven't crossed any lines. But you want to." He didn't answer immediately. That pause told me everything. He started, then stopped. "We have a good working relationship. She's talented. We collaborate well. I enjoy working with her. But I'm not having an affair. You hug her goodbye. I watched you. That wasn't a colleague hug. That was intimate. She's affectionate, European. It doesn't mean anything. European? She's from Denmark originally, moved to LA for grad school, and stayed. Different cultural norms around physical contact. Convenient excuse. It's not an excuse. It's context. Blake hugs everyone. It's just her personality. Does she leave blonde hairs on everyone's jacket? Or just yours?" He didn't have a response to that. We sat in tense silence. "I'm not having an affair," he said finally. "But I think maybe I've let the professional relationship become more friendly than it should be. Blake is easy to work with, fun to be around, makes me feel..." He stopped. "Feel what?" "Appreciated, seen, like I'm good at what I do. She respects my opinions, values my input. We have this collaborative dynamic that makes work exciting instead of just a job. And I don't make you feel that way. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. You've been getting something from Blake that you're not getting at home. Appreciation, excitement, being seen. And it's starting to cross lines even if you haven't physically cheated yet. I don't know how to fix this, he said quietly. Start by being honest. Is there anything between you and Blake that's crossed into an inappropriate territory? Even if you haven't slept together, have you had conversations or moments that you wouldn't want me to know about? He was quiet for a long time. Then, we had drinks once, after a particularly difficult meeting with the City Planning Commission. Kenneth was supposed to join, but had to leave early. It ended up just being Blake and me. We talked for 2 hours, about work at first, then about other things, life, what we wanted, what we were afraid of, the kind of conversation you have when someone actually listens, actually cares about your answers. What did you tell her? That I felt invisible sometimes, like I'd become just Sophie's dad and Kim's husband, and the guy who does commercial real estate. Like I'd lost track of who Marcus was separate from all the roles I play. Blake said she understood. Said she sometimes felt like people only saw her architecture, not her. We connected over feeling seen as ourselves instead of just our functions. My chest hurt. When was this? November, early November, before Thanksgiving. Before I'd started actively monitoring the blonde hairs. Back when I'd just been vaguely uneasy without being able to name why. Have you talked to her about us? About our marriage? Not specifically, but she knows I'm married, knows I have a daughter. I wear my ring. I talk about you when relevant. But you also had a 2-hour intimate conversation with her about feeling invisible and being seen, and all the things you should have been talking to me about instead. I know. You're right. I should have talked to you, should have told you I was feeling disconnected. But it seemed easier to talk to Blake because she didn't have expectations, didn't need me to be anything except myself in that moment. Whereas I need you to be a husband and a father and a functional adult who hangs up his own jackets. That's not fair. Neither is emotionally cheating with a blonde Danish architect because she makes you feel appreciated. He flinched at emotionally cheating, but didn't argue. We spent the next several days in uncomfortable limbo. Marcus insisted nothing physical had happened with Blake. I believed him, mostly, but also knew that emotional affairs could be just as damaging as physical ones. Maybe more damaging because they involved actual connection and vulnerability rather than just sex. 3 days after our confrontation, Marcus showed me an email he'd sent to Kenneth, his business partner. Subject line, need to transition Blake Morrison projects. The email explained that Marcus felt his working relationship with Blake had become more personal than professional, and that to maintain appropriate boundaries, he wanted Kenneth to take over as primary point of contact for all projects Blake was involved in. Marcus would stay on the projects, but in a reduced capacity, attending key meetings but stepping back from day-to-day collaboration. This is what I can do, Marcus said. I can't quit my job or stop working with our firm's architects entirely, but I can create distance from Blake specifically. Make sure we're not alone together. Make sure someone else is managing the relationship. Did you tell Blake why? I told her I felt the working relationship was getting too friendly, and I needed to maintain clearer professional boundaries out of respect for my marriage. She understood, said she'd been feeling similar confusion, and was glad I addressed it before anything happened that we'd regret. She was feeling it too, apparently. which means we both needed to step back before emotional attraction turned into something more. We started marriage counseling in January. A therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in emotional affairs and rebuilding intimacy after trust breaches. The first session was difficult. Marcus having to admit he'd developed feelings for someone else, even if he hadn't acted on them physically. Me having to admit I'd felt him pulling away for months, but hadn't addressed it, until blonde hair evidence forced confrontation. Emotional affairs often start as innocent professional friendships, Dr. Chen explained. You work with someone, develop mutual respect, enjoy their company, then slowly the friendship deepens. You share things you're not sharing with your spouse. You look forward to seeing them more than you look forward to going home. You start measuring your marriage against this new connection and finding your marriage lacking by comparison. But that comparison isn't fair, she continued. You're comparing the easy fun parts of a new relationship. Interesting conversations, mutual appreciation, excitement, with the hard, mundane parts of marriage, bills and dishes and parenting stress. New connections feel better because they're not yet weighted with responsibility and routine. Marcus nodded. Blake felt easy because we only interacted in professional contexts. Good conversations about architecture and development. No fights about who forgot to pay the electric bill or whose turn it is to drive Sophie to soccer. Exactly, Dr. Chen said. Affairs, emotional or physical, thrive on the absence of real life. The moment you introduce actual daily existence, they lose their magic. Over the following months, we did the hard work of rebuilding. Marcus maintaining distance from Blake professionally. Kenneth handled the Culver City project and all other Blake Morrison collaborations. Marcus coming home immediately after work instead of stopping for drinks with colleagues. You scheduling regular date nights where we had the kinds of real conversations we'd been avoiding, where we talked about feeling invisible and overwhelmed and disconnected instead of just managing logistics. We also had uncomfortable conversations about what had gone wrong, about how we'd both let the marriage become transactional. I needed him to be functional partner, and he needed me to be appreciative audience, and neither of us was giving the other what they actually needed. I don't want to just be your co-parent and roommate, Marcus said during one therapy session. I want to be your husband, the person you're excited to see, not just the person who exists in your house. I don't want to just be your responsibility, I said. I want to be your partner, someone you talk to about real feelings, not just logistics. In March, Marcus switched projects entirely, took on a large development in Pasadena that required him to work with different architects, different contractors, different teams, distance from Blake by virtue of simply working elsewhere. I asked him once if he missed working with her. He was honest. Sometimes we did good work together, but I miss being disconnected from you more, and I can't have both, so I'm choosing us. Last month, I found a blonde hair on Marcus's jacket again. My immediate reaction was panic. Was he seeing Blake again? Had the distance been temporary? But when I asked about his day, he explained he'd been at a city planning meeting where a blonde woman from the zoning commission had reviewed their permits while standing close to see the architectural plans he'd spread on the table. Different blonde, different context. Hair as evidence of professional proximity, not emotional betrayal. I removed the hair without drama. Chose to believe his explanation because we'd built enough renewed trust that blonde hairs no longer automatically meant worst-case scenarios. That's what the first blonde hairs taught me. That physical evidence can indicate problems even when you can't yet see them clearly. That emotional affairs exist in gray areas between appropriate and inappropriate, that the person you are married to can develop feelings for someone else without intending to, without crossing clear lines, but still in ways that damage your marriage. Marcus didn't sleep with Blake Morrison, but he developed emotional intimacy with her that belonged in our marriage, had conversations with her that should have been with me, let himself be seen by her in ways he'd stopped allowing with me. The blonde hairs were evidence, not of physical infidelity, but of emotional distancing, of Marcus investing attention elsewhere that should have been invested here. We're still rebuilding. 14 months since I first found those hairs. We're better than we were, but not perfect. Some days I see Marcus and feel connected, feel like we're genuinely partners working towards the same goals. Other days I see blonde hair on his jacket, in the wild, in photos of professional events, and feel a small flutter of panic before remembering that we're doing the work, that trust is slowly returning, that emotional affairs can be recovered from if both people choose recovery. Dr. Chen says we're doing well, says most couples don't survive emotional affairs because they can't name what happened. Nothing physical occurred, so what exactly are you recovering from? But the betrayal is real even without sex. The hurt is valid even without physical evidence beyond blonde hairs on jackets. I keep the first hair I found. It's preserved in a small plastic bag in my desk drawer. Sounds morbid, maybe, but I keep it as a reminder that small evidence shouldn't be ignored, that paying attention to patterns matters, that the relationship between my husband and another woman almost crossed lines that would have destroyed our marriage. And it didn't, because I noticed the hairs, asked the questions, demanded the truth. That's the story of the blonde hair on his jacket. Not a physical affair, but an emotional one. Not sex, but intimacy. Not betrayal that happened, but betrayal that almost happened, that was developing over months of Tuesday site visits and Thursday meetings and 2-hour conversations about feeling seen and appreciated. The hairs led me to the truth. And the truth, while painful, was something we could work with, something we could address and recover from, because it happened before either of them crossed irreversible lines. I don't know if we'd have survived if Marcus had actually slept with Blake, if the emotional connection had progressed to physical. But we didn't have to find out because blonde hairs gave me evidence early enough to intervene, to confront, to demand we address the problem before it became catastrophic. Sometimes I wonder about Blake. If she's working with other developers now, if she's having similar emotional connections with other married men, if Marcus was special, or if this is just how she works, building intimacy through collaboration, blurring professional and personal in ways that feel harmless until someone's marriage is at risk. But mostly, I don't think about Blake. I think about us, about Marcus and me and Sophie, and the marriage we're rebuilding with more honesty and intentionality than the one before. The blonde hairs taught me to pay attention, to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, to ask hard questions even when I'm afraid of the answers, and to know that marriages can recover from emotional affairs if both people are willing to do the painful work of rebuilding instead of pretending nothing happened. Marcus doesn't work with Blake anymore. The Culver City building finished construction last month. It's beautiful, by all accounts. A testament to good collaboration between developer and architect. Blake's Instagram shows photos of the completed project. Marcus didn't like them, didn't comment, maintain the distance we established. I walked past the building last week, looked at it, and felt complicated things. Appreciation for beautiful architecture, anger at what almost happened, relief that we caught it before irreversible damage, sadness that my marriage needed a near crisis to force the conversations we should have been having all along, but also hope, because we're still here, still married, still working on it. And that feels like something worth celebrating, even if the path here involved blonde hairs and emotional affairs and painful confrontations. The hairs are gone now. Either Marcus isn't working closely enough with any blonde women to accumulate evidence, or I've stopped checking his jackets obsessively because I'm learning to trust again. Either way, our laundry is currently blonde hair free. And that's probably the real measure of recovery. Not that affairs become impossible, but that trust returns enough that you stop looking for evidence of them, that you hang up your spouse's jacket without examining it for hairs, that you believe their explanations about their day, that you choose faith over surveillance. We're not there completely yet, but we're closer than we were 14 months ago, when blonde hairs were my primary evidence that something was wrong. That's what the blonde hair on his jacket taught me. That physical evidence of emotional affairs exists if you pay attention. That recovery is possible if you catch it early. And that marriages worth saving are worth the uncomfortable work of honest conversations and clear boundaries and choosing each other again and again, even after you've almost lost each other. The blonde hairs are gone. The marriage remains. And that feels like the right ending to this particular crisis. Not perfect, but preserved. Not unchanged, but still here.